Hey, what's going on with shipping? Sal Mercogliano here. We're going to break down the events that transpired last night in New York Harbor. This is the allision between the Mexican sail training ship Cuauhtémoc and the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, there's a lot of information floating out there, a lot of videos. What we're going to do is break down what we think happened and give you the facts as we know them. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a former merchant mariner turned maritime historian, maritime analyst. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at some of these videos first, and then we'll break it down. So this is Cuauhtémoc departing from the dock there at South Street Seaport. Now, this is a Mexican naval vessel. It's a sail training ship. And you will see the cadets up in the rigging of this vessel as the ship departs. That is normal, what's called dressing ship. So the crew would be up in that area as the vessel departed. The bow was pointing into the dock toward Manhattan with the stern pointing out. This image taken from a Manhattan hotel shows you two important things. One, you see the tug Charles B. McAllister here is not hooked up alongside the vessel. And here you see the ship striking the Brooklyn Bridge. You will notice a wake coming from the Cuauhtémoc as the ship is going. We believe that the ship, when it ordered its engines to go ahead, instead went astern in reverse. And a combination of wind, current, and a stern propulsion sent the ship into the Brooklyn Bridge. This image taken from the Brooklyn side of the Brooklyn Bridge shows you Cuauhtémoc coming in. First, notice the flag. You see the wind there coming in, but more noticing here is the fact the ship is underway. You can see the wake being, this is not just current pushing here. The ship is physically moving. The engine is astern, and the ship is striking the top sails there. We're striking the top of the Brooklyn Bridge, or the bottom of the Brooklyn Bridge. This is a ship tracking app called Marine Traffic. All ships basically transmit their position via AIS, an automated identification system. The Cuauhtémoc was docked right here at the South Street Seaport, bow pointing in, stern pointing out, and I'm going to show you a replay of it here in a minute. Ship came out here into the current and then struck the bottom of the Brooklyn Bridge right over here. Ship anchored over here between the Brooklyn Bridge and the Manhattan Bridge, and now the vessel is pierside just north here of the Manhattan Bridge. This was the image this morning. This is the image this morning of the vessel pierside in Manhattan. Now, a couple of things to note about Cuauhtémoc. The masts on this vessel are steel. These are steel masts. If these had been wooden masts, we could have seen a catastrophic collapse of all the masts at the same time. Wooden masts on three-masted sailing vessels are tied in together through a series of lines, shrouds, and stays. And when you see one collapse, you can cause the others collapse. Fortunately, we did not have that happen. Where the injuries probably took place are on these top sails, and you can see part of the top sail. This is the four-mast top sail. I'm going to zoom in here a bit for you. This is the four-mast topsail collapse forward, and then the main topsail is here collapse, and then the mizzen, the aftersail top, is bent down here. And I'll give you some more images, and we'll talk a little bit more about detail. All right, let's take you through a TikTok of the events that transpired on the evening of 17 May 2025. This is 8 p.m. in New York City. This is the South Street Seaport here. This is on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. This is the Brooklyn Bridge. This is Brooklyn right here. Up here is the Manhattan Bridge. And Cuauhtémoc was docked right here, bow in. This is an image of her actually right here below me, showing you the vessel. You can see the Brooklyn Bridge in the background. She is bow in. Now, normally you would flip a ship around to have the bow out so that when you cast off, you can just put the engines ahead and off you go. But in the case of a sail training ship, you really want to kind of highlight a ship. And so the bowsprit, the big, huge area there on the front of the ship, where you hook the stay sails on, the forward stay sails on, you want that kind of being the first thing you see. Now, I will note this, having been a former merchant mariner, hours before the ship sets sail, you go through a series of checks on board the vessel. One of the things that you will do is communicate with the engine room and test the engine on the ship going forward and astern. The ship was built back in the 80s. She's one of four sister ships of sail training ships in South America. She was built in Spain. The ship has been around the world multiple times. Matter of fact, this ship just came from the west coast of Mexico through the Panama Canal. She was scheduled to depart that night and head to Iceland. So she was leaving New York City. but they would have conducted a substantial test of the ship before it ever departed. So I want to show you this video of the vessel. This was not during that period. This is during a different event. But one of the things I want you to note here is a couple of things, is the crew members. And you'll notice here they are securing themselves. So everyone has a harness on board. And I'm going to pause it right there. All the crew members have harnesses so that you can basically secure yourself in. And what you see here is those crew members fixing themselves, in this case, into the shrouds. The shrouds are what go up the port and starboard side, hold the mast up so that you can climb up into the vessel. So they are all secured into place. And when the ship leaves, you dress the ship and you get all your crew up on the different areas, and you'll see them up there on the yards. The yards are the wooden beams go across from which the sails are affixed. Now the yards get smaller as they go up the mast, and that's because of pressure on the mast. You tend to have smaller groups in here. So one of the comments that was said, and I want to clarify here, is that why didn't they get everybody out of the rig and have them come down? If they had done that, you would have to unhook. You would have to unhook from the ship, and you would have been not connected, which means when the ship hit the Brooklyn Bridge, you could have had crew members fall. Out of the crew of 277, we've had about 24 injuries on board, 2 of them fatal, and I would envision that the fatalities were probably caused while the crew was hooked in on those upper masts. Those lines probably came loose or got disconnected when the mast collapsed, and therefore they were not secure. And I think that is a major issue. You do not want to have the crew unhook themselves and not be connected. You know, back in the day of sail, you would never have these safety harnesses on board. But one of the things that probably saved a lot of lives right here was the fact that this ship's masts are steel, so the mast didn't collapse, and second, the crew was locked into place. So next thing I want to talk about is tide and current at the moment the ship was leaving, along with wind. So this is the tidal pattern for the Brooklyn Bridge. So the ship was leaving Saturday at 8 p.m. You'll notice here that the low tide was at 6:05 p.m. Water was 0.33 meters above mean low water, and it was surging up. High tide was due at just after midnight at 12:31 a.m. and it was a range of about 1 meter here, so about a 3-foot tide. Now, that area in the East River is really tight, which means that while a 3-foot tidal rise, not huge, so tide was coming in, you're 2 hours after low tide. Tides flip every 6 hours, so it's diurnal. So 2 hours after low tide, tide would have been pushing you in toward the bridge. Add to it, you had about a 10-knot wind. And so this imagery here, done by a good friend of mine who's a pilot over in Europe, shows you, the black line shows you where Cuauhtémoc was, bow in at this time. The wind was from the southwest at 10 knots. The current was coming up here. And as Cuauhtémoc would come out of the berth, back out of the berth, the wind and current would start pushing that stern toward the bridge. Now, I do think there's going to be a question here regarding the timing of when the ship left. If it had left 2 hours earlier, it would have been slack tide. If it had left earlier than that, the tide would actually have been setting them away from the bridge. So I want to show you this image because this is another indicator we look for. Even though this ship is dressed and has flags everywhere, there's a flag flying right here from the aft mast, from the gaff sail there on the aft mast, and that is the hotel flag. That is the flag for the symbol letter H. It is a red and white flag. That is the international signal for a pilot on board. So this ship has a pilot on board. Now, I do have a question about whether or not it is a docking pilot or a Sandy Hook pilot. I envision it's a Sandy Hook pilot. Sandy Hook pilots are the pilots that take the ship out of New York Harbor through the Verrazano Bridge and out of New York altogether. You are required to have pilotage. Foreign vessels are required to have pilotage. But this is a Mexican naval vessel, so this vessel has sovereign immunity. So the question I have is whether or not there was a docking pilot. Sometimes you will bring a pilot, and what a pilot does is provide a ship's master or ship's captain with expertise in the area. So a captain is ultimately responsible. You do not take away responsibility from the ship's captain. A pilot comes on board to assist. Now, the pilot may be given command or control of the vessel, the con, but that does not alleviate the master. And the tug here, the Charles McAllister from McAllister Tugs, if they had a docking pilot on, that master would have come from McAllister probably. So working on trying to get that information, we just don't have that yet. So another question that has come up is, why did the ship head toward the bridge? The ship was not intending to sail under the Brooklyn Bridge. And the reason we know that is because the sails are taller, the mast and sails are taller than the Brooklyn Bridge. There was no intention for this ship to go upriver. The ship was departing. It was heading southbound, not northbound. And this chart shows you the mast height. There's a distance between the water and the bottom of the Brooklyn Bridge. This is called air draft. All vessels have their water draft, they have their air draft. And going under bridges, you have to know what your air draft is. No intention for this ship to go under the Brooklyn Bridge. Number one, it couldn't reach. Second, there's nothing to go up there, too. You would go under the Brooklyn Bridge, you would go under the Manhattan Bridge. This is the worst time to be heading up into the East River. You're heading to the max current at the time. Off Roosevelt Island, you have about 5 knots. And then you have to go through a confluence called Hell's Gate, which is the worst current in the East River, to head out into the Long Island Sound. Instead, this ship was heading southbound, very clear. It was not intending to head northbound. So I'm going to take you through the events of the ship undocking, and we're going to use some pictures, still frames. It's hard to match the video with the exact moment, so I'm going to use some still frames and show you what was happening as the ship was departing. So this is roughly 8:17 p.m. Again, the time clock here is set to UTC or GMT time. It's a 4-hour difference. So here is Cuauhtémoc coming off the berth. You'll see the blue tug here is Charles D. McAllister, and she is up against the ship. Now, this image I have here for you shows you the Charles McAllister being used to maneuver the vessel out. Now, as the ship backs out of the berth, the current and wind are going to hit the back end of the ship, the stern, and it's going to want to push the stern toward the bridge. What we see here is that Charles McAllister is between the sailing vessel and the bridge. So it is using its bow, the tug Charles McAllister, to push the Cuauhtémoc from hitting the bridge. This image is taken from the Brooklyn Bridge, and it's a few minutes after that. One of the things to note here is on board Cuauhtémoc, you'll see a tarp is over the starboard quarter here. Starboard is the right side and quarter is the back end of the vessel. Ships like a training ship like this really want to keep its hull pristine, and they don't want tugs touching against the hull because it leaves black marks. So they had rigged right here for the tug to touch just here on the starboard quarter. However, notice here that the tug is actually touching up here forward, up on the starboard bow forward. Now, if they had planned for the tug to come into contact with Cuauhtémoc, they would have rigged the tarp forward so that you didn't get the scuff marks on it. And I should note that this tug is a bit of an older tug. A good buddy of mine who's a pilot over in Europe made the comment very, very correctly that most tugs, when used for docking and undocking now, don't push, they pull. And many tugs are modern tugs that have what are called azimuth drives. Basically, they have a 360-degree propeller. It's mounted underneath the tug, and it can point in any directions. In the case of the Charles McAllister, she's an older tug built in 1967, so she's got some age on her, but she has been rebuilt multiple times. She has 1,800 horsepower, so she's a good, powerful tug. But again, the way she gets that power is by pushing. And you can see this here in a docking she was doing with an ACL roll-on, roll-off container ship where she is up against that starboard quarter and giving a nudge. So I want to talk about this picture because there's a lot happening in this image for you to be aware of. First off, notice the crew up on the yards. They have lights on them so that you can see them all. They are all up here. Also notice right behind the Cuauhtémoc here is a small little launch vessel, the McShiney. It is heading northbound. It is right behind Cuauhtémoc. And what you see here is Charles McAllister coming up on the starboard bow of the vessel, giving a push trying to get the vessel straight into the current. So I am not sure if there was an issue here with McShiney coming in and passing basically a port-to-port passage here. This is exactly the way you would want to do it. If you notice here, Cuauhtémoc is not really showing her exact orientation here. Almost looks like McShiney is coming in the side. It's not, as you see in this image, but that does create a little bit of traffic. It could also create a diversion here for the ship's pilot that's on board, the ship's master, the officer of the deck, to be worried about this. And you see Charles McAllister is giving a little bit of power here. You can see the wake on the vessel here, and the bow is coming up here into contact with the starboard bow of the training vessel. This image is a really important one because McShiney has now passed and Cuauhtémoc is pointing downriver, and it's at this point that you'd want to engage the ship's engines and start coming ahead. But what we start to see here is a wake coming from Cuauhtémoc, but the wake isn't the way we expect it to be. We see the ship actually going astern, and what it appears happens here is the ship's diesel engine is not in a head gear, it's in a stern gear. And what we're getting is the ship now heading with wind and current and now forward propulsion heading toward the bridge. Now, there's not a lot of time here for the ship to react. The ship has very little time to really control itself. What you would want to do is get the ship out of gear. A lot of people are talking about why didn't they drop the anchor. They would have an anchor ready to drop. You would prepare an anchor to drop as you're departing just in case. However, if you're under wind, current, and sail, and all of a sudden you now have propulsion added to it, even if you drop that anchor, it's probably not going to stop you from hitting the bridge. So here is that replay that we see with the vessel hitting the bridge, coming underneath it. You'll notice Charles McAllister is racing ahead here in the video, trying to get on the other side of Cuauhtémoc. There's no way she can just throw a line and grab her. Instead, she knows Cuauhtémoc is going stern first into the Brooklyn shore. She's trying to get into position. The great thing here, I know it's very hard to say this with 2 dead and over 24 injured, is that the mast did not come down. The crew was secured in their harnesses and they were able to be in position. The other thing is the proximity of this ship to the response teams. You'll notice how fast New York fireboats, New York police and fire rescue craft arrive on scene here. So here's that image of Cuauhtémoc coming stern first. This is taken from underneath the Brooklyn Bridge. Again, notice the power that's on the ship at this time. Notice the the flag. You see the wind, current, and more than likely what we saw was those people in the top of the mast there that come tumbling down are the ones that suffered the casualties. We know, according to the press conference last night, Mayor Adams, the police noted that 2 of the crew members struck the deck. Those were probably in those very top masts that came down, unfortunately, and that's probably what caused the fatalities on board. So a couple of things to wrap this up and put into context, things we're going to be looking for answers. There's going to be an investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, and the Mexican Navy. That'll be going on. This is in U.S. waters. NTSB will have a jurisdiction over this. So a couple of questions right off the bat. Number 1, was the engine tested prior to departure? What was the thing that caused the vessel to go in the stern? Why did the ship decide to depart 2 hours after the current flipped and you had a flood current coming in along with wind that was going to set you on the bridge? Third, why was it that the ship did not sail with the tug hooked up alongside? That is the responsibility of the ship's captain. It's not the tugboat. The tugboat does whatever you tell it to do. The Charles McAllister, the tug there, doesn't make the decision whether to stay tied on or not to tie it on. That is up to the master, along if there was a docking pilot on board. What was the role of the pilot on board? If this was a Sandy Hook Bay pilot, Sandy Hook Bay pilots don't dock vessels, and so they would have very little information here or role in what was happening at the time. What was the issues that happened on board the vessel after they struck? What was the safety precautions that were done? Again, you've got these really stark images here of the crew up in the rigging. Now, notice here, I mentioned before, those masts. This is not one continuous mast, and I can't quite get the right information, and I apologize. I know the lower masts here are steel, but sometimes the upper masts that are hooked on, you'll see the mast kind of overlap. This is where you hook the upper mast to the lower mast. Sometimes these upper masts are made out of wood, and so I'm not sure if this is a wooden mast that collapsed and broke here, or if that was steel that fractured. But you'll see that the top mast did not collapse entirely. It did not fall to the deck. It still remained secure. Here you see images of the crew hanging from their safety lines at this time. These crew members are well trained in how to use that rigging, so they would have initiated the immediate effect to try to save the crew, along with the response from the FDNY and the New York Police Department to get their high angle teams up there and start lowering crew members and retrieving them. This was a statement put out last night on the FDNY's Twitter feed. At approximately 8:20 Saturday night, the FDNY received a call that a boat struck the Brooklyn Bridge. There were 277 people on the boat. 27 people were removed for treatment. Quote, originally we had a Brooklyn box out for folks in the water. A box response is basically how fire departments respond to a certain call. They have a set number of units that go out for a boat in distress. Once the Marine units arrived on scene, we knew immediately that we had a serious incident with a boat striking the bridge, so we had reports of people in the water. At that point, coming down the FDR, we decided to have a dual command post both on the Brooklyn side and on the Manhattan side. Our Marine units got out there, picked up Rescue 2 and Rescue 4, and brought them out to the vessel. Every borough in New York, there are 5 of them, have a designated rescue unit, rescues 1 through 5, and so 2 and 4 responded to the scene. They started to remove and treat the aided. They also brought EMS units out to the vessel to start to treat the more seriously injured people on the vessel. They brought them all to Pier 16, where we set up a casualty collection point and an EMS staging area to assess the victims and send the most serious to the hospital right away. The police, fire, and EMS did a tremendous job of working together to get everybody off that ship safe, said Chief of Training Michael Myers. So this is basically a mass casualty scene that took place on board the vessel and along the Brooklyn shore. So obviously they'll be getting information from the New York Police Department, the New York Fire Department with this. So a lot of investigation to go in. But again, it's pretty clear from the imagery that we had either a mechanical or human error that sent this vessel into the bridge, with the ship using a stern propulsion at the time. 2 dead, again, about 24 injured, and just a horrific event here for the Mexican Navy. According to Adams, family members are being flown into the United States right now. Obviously, this is going to cancel that voyage of the ship. The ship, as I mentioned to you, is pierside on the Manhattan side of the river, probably will be moved and relocated. She was brought there by tugboats under the Manhattan Bridge to there. Not sure where final repairs will be done to get this ship back into a condition where she can sail. There is actually a repair facility at the old Brooklyn Navy Yard. There's one across the river over in Bayonne. Ship will probably need to be dry docked because it did run aground. The stern struck the shore on the Brooklyn side. We'll keep you up to date with more information as we get them, but I wanted to kind of give you this breakdown today with what we know. Tune in to what's going on with shipping for all you need to know about global shipping, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Well, number one, you can subscribe and like to the page. You can give it a thumbs up. You can share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You hit that super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Thoughts and prayers out there with the crew of Cuauhtémoc and the Mexican Navy. It was a horrific incident. Hats off to the crew members on board for jumping into a rescue response, to the tug crews out there, everybody in the marine environment in New York, FDNY, New York Police Department, the Coast Guard. It was a massive response last night, and you saw it unfold live on TV. I appreciate everybody tuning in for my live stream and my edited version there. Hopefully this will start answering some questions. Till the next episode, this is Sal, signing off.